Hello, everyone. I am Sharindria Robinson,
And I'm Marcus Robinson.
and I want to welcome you to another episode of Faith, Family, and Finance. We are so delighted to be in your living room on this nice Sunday evening, night. Tonight, we have a very interesting topic. I think we always have interesting topics, but let's get to the point. Tonight, we have some interesting things we want to share, but as always, it won't be the same without your dialogue and conversation. So, what I'm going to ask you to do now is to invite a friend, let other people know that we are on the air. We typically we are continuing to try to build this platform as so many people are accustomed to us doing this from our personal pages, although we haven't done it from our personal pages in so long, but we keep sharing, we keep doing watch parties, and so y'all keep watching elsewhere, and as opposed to being on this platform. But thank you to those of you who are on this platform. We appreciate it. And tonight we are going to talk about whatever Marcus typed in the box on Facebook to say we're going to talk about. No, I'm joking. What was it? We're talking about tonight. We're talking about the church, your church, the black church, and why are people leaving? Why is there this mass exodus? So prior to COVID-19 and us worshiping, hey Taylor, us worshiping in the building, there were so many people who were leaving the building. So many people who were leaving the building. And many of them, they grew up in traditional African American churches, and they, from what I've heard from people young and old, I need to say this, young and old, that the church wasn't meeting their needs. They couldn't see the relevance. They couldn't see this and the third. And so oftentimes we would see in our communities, uh, in African American communities, other churches pop up that were not African American churches, and we would see this mass exodus from African American churches to some of the other churches that met our needs. And I feel like we've gone down this road a little bit before, but in this political climate, in this pandemic, I think it requires us to revisit. So once we got out of the building, we started having church at home.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody stopped talking about the fact that everybody was leaving church anyway. It's
Right.
like we just gonna act like people weren't already leaving church before we started having church at home. So that's what we want to talk about.
So you're saying the downfall of the church was not due to COVID-19?
No.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah,
We're on the
people
same.
were already leaving.
Yeah, yeah, in droves.
And we just got distracted. And so now my question is, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing to reach the people who some had one foot in the door, one foot out the door, some had both feet out the door, they were done. What are we doing to try to reach those people during this season? And there's so much more I want to add to that, but I'm gonna let you go because I just said a whole lot already. I'm just trying to give y'all a snapshot. That was supposed to be the title. Wow, of what we're talking about tonight. So as you can see, there's just so much to say on this topic because if I go back to the Black Church in 1955,
Mm-hmm.
and what it looked like then and what they were involved in 1960 and 1963, and fast forward and you see what's going on now in 2020, then you get the question of, should we be out there, are we out there on the front lines where the people are who left the church?
Right.
um is that where we should be to try to get them to come back? I don't know where they're coming back to with so many people back in their
Well,
buildings.
I think we had so many different dynamics. I mean, the problems are the same, but the dynamics are different.
Right.
So, for instance, there was brutality, there was racism, and all this stuff. In the 1950s, 60s, 40s, 30s, and on back. But the thing was, is like the church was the epicenter of everything for the black community. We couldn't really go to school at one point. We couldn't congregate anywhere other than church. And so it became the place where, our political ideas were formed. We also socialized. And that's where our economics was. And so it's kind of like some of that has been disbanded over time.
Mm-hmm.
And, reality is, I don't think it's necessarily just a black church phenomenon. You know,
Right.
people are leaving church. Period. Christian
Right.
church. Period.
Right.
But the difference is, and I don't know, I can't remember. It might have been Jesse Jackson who said, you know, when mainstream America gets a cold, Black America gets the flu, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's
That
one of
part.
those situations where, you know, if we lose our epicenter, we lose our community. You know, and it just leaves us with a hood. You know, we don't really have communities because we don't really have the things that comprise a community. So, like, a community, in its most purest sense, is comprised of hospitals, comprised of grocery stores. You know, you got to be able to defend yourself. All those types of things, you know, and quite frankly, we don't manufacture those things. We don't own those entities. So that means we have to go to someone else's neighborhood to get those entities. And so that's the kind of thing that we have to look out for, when it comes down to how, you know, it's not about worship style. It's really about maintaining our community. And so, you know, I've been a musician for a while. And the reality is, I've played for, yes, both black and white churches. And I've seen this, you know, this exodus over time where, you know, they're leaving what grew them and what grew their parents, you know. And it's funny because it's not a lot of data on what we're talking about. Even right now, I was looking all almost the whole day and I found some stuff, but the sample sizes are not huge. And I don't know if it's because, you know, the mainstream statisticians, they don't really study what we're interested in, you know. But we got some things that we probably need to start really looking at, because the reality is, if our churches go, our communities go, our economics go, our socioeconomics go, and our political power goes. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's one of those things we got to be concerned, because right now, you know, what's happening is people in lieu of church are basically attaching themselves to other organizations.
Right.
You know, so it could be fraternal, it could be, Black Lives Matter, it could be whatever, but it's not what got us here.
Right. And we started this off by talking about the black church. Hello, thank y'all for typing people's name in. We
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Hey, Pastor Folsom.
I see Cottrell is saying that you saw results. You saw results from the church
Mm.
back then, but it seemed as if the church had more of a mission and a purpose. They were addressing the church was addressing some of the community issues that we now see addressed by nonprofit and social service and human service agencies. And right now, I guess I don't know if we just decided that since those agencies are here and those agencies are addressing certain things in the church, we don't need to address those issues anymore because someone else has it taken care of. So let's just preach Jesus. And I know I started this, and maybe Marcus, when he put it out there, talked about or put out there the word the black church, and we say the black church because that's our point of reference, of course. But what I want to look at is Christianity as a whole. When you look at it, according to the Pew Research Center, the number of people who identified, and this is a 2019 statistic, but the number of people who identify with Christianity has significantly decreased
Mm-hmm.
just in the past 10 years. And so that's what, kind of prompted this conversation because from everywhere that I sat, this is what we were talking about just before we went into sheltering in place, just before we started getting out of the building and having church at home. So it doesn't matter if you're looking at Protestants or Catholics. According to this particular research, it said that 43% of U.S. adults identify with being a Protestant, and that's down 51% from 2009.
Yeah.
So 43%. And again, all this is relative because we talk about sample size and all that, but this is from the Pew Research Center. So 43% of people identify with being Protestant, and that's down 51%. Meanwhile, if you look at Catholics, 1 in 5 adults, so 20%, are Catholic, and that's down from again another 23% in 2009. So it's just the mainstream church as we know it. People are just saying, I'm over it. I'm done with it. And when you talk about the Christian church, it's so amazing that when Jesus came on the scene. The things that Jesus talked about, that Isaiah prophesied, that Jesus said that he was coming here to do. These are the things when you start talking about the mission of the church that we should be talking about, and that we're saying that we're lifting up and that we're upholding. But so many of us are not doing that, and so people are saying, "Okay, let's go." There was a clear. The church was, we're here to feed the hungry, to clothe those who are naked, to give sight to the blind, to set free those who are in bondage or who are in captivity. To do our part, to play our part in doing those things. But also, you saw as an African American church during the civil rights movement, in particular, we were on the front line. We were marching. We were singing the songs. We were, if we couldn't march, we, like now, if you can't march, we had water bottles or we had prayers. There were women and men who were inside the building. So when those people were hurt in the marches, they could come there and they could bandage them up and they could do whatever. There were businessmen and women and influence who could bail people out of jail, with their money. Everybody had a different role, and people kind of knew their role because they came together and they strategized. And so what I want to just kind of throw in too, Marcus, is that so people came to the church for more than just to lift their hands to praise the Lord, to have Bible study, to have choir rehearsal, and to have like deacon board and trustee and steward board meeting. Like people came to church they came inside that building for community meetings and to strategize. And now we are afraid to allow our buildings to be used for people to come in and strategize and do those things because I don't know what we fear. I don't know. Somebody told us something wrong when it comes down to separation of church and state. So we don't want people. So we don't want people to do that. I can't speak for other people's churches, but we know, that we offer the type of message. And I mean, there's another pastor friend of mine on here. We offer the messages of hope, the messages of lifting people up. It's not just about a message, but we offer the financial classes. We offer trying to help people start their own businesses and uplifting people. You have some churches that are doing that, but by and large, people are frustrated. Like I see some of the frustration on here. So
right, I'm just like, some of these comments are extremely insightful. Justice Cox says, messages of hope are not substantial. It is not, if it's not backed by education and tools to navigate through the system. And I mean, that's true. I mean, the reality is you got to be able to live after you hear this word. You got to be able to live after you lift your hands and sing unto the Lord. And the reality is, it's interesting that we have, looks like 2 or 3 generations on here even now. And, everybody's trying to get to the meat of the bone. Why are we here? I ain't gonna lie, I asked that question years ago going to church. Why do we have to come? I understand what the Bible says, and that's oftentimes why we're there. Just because the Bible says so. But, at the end of the day, we want to have some benefit for congregating every week. You know what I mean? And it's interesting that you would talk about all of the things that the church used to do. There's an organization that does it now. So, we didn't, when we couldn't have neighborhood associations, now we have neighborhood associations where we have our community meetings, and what that does, again, it dilutes the power. Anytime you start stripping away from anything, you dilute power. And so, for instance, when we had voting blocks, we had to stay in the same neighborhoods. Once we finally got the right to vote, it really meant something. And it's funny because I had a video that popped up in my Facebook feed from maybe about 2 years ago. Rapper Roxanne Shante talked about how instead of leaving the hood, we need to come and buy back the hood. And so she's absolutely right. I mean, right now we don't really own our neighborhoods, and unfortunately, we don't own many of our churches. If you don't believe me, just go ask the bank. Right now, most of our churches are mortgaged. Whereas back in the day, 50 years ago, you had a building fund. Now, granted, it might take 10 years to get a doorknob.
I was about to say, today we got a building fund. Like let's
well, we had a building fund with no mortgage. Let me say it that way.
Okay.
If you have a building fund with no mortgage and you have no real bills to speak of, your preachers, your pastors, they're not obligated to say what you want to hear because they really can preach the unadulterated word of God with no consequences.
And we have people now. No, I know we both. Thank you. Yes, Montel. They built the churches with their hands. Thank you.
That too.
That too is very critical. We do not use our hands for any of that right now. That is very critical. And there comes a point where there's a generation who just cannot use their hands and their backs to build these buildings anymore. And so when you reach a certain age, you are just not going to be able, it doesn't even make sense for the 75-year-old carpenter to be out there doing this work, but he is frustrated because the 25-year-old is not interested in being out there doing the work. The 25-year-old is not interested in figuring out how to lay brick, how to build a foundation. I said that already. How to build a foundation, they're not interested in that. They're not interested in any of that. And so then you get what we got. My grandfather built our house. He taught his sons how to do the same thing. Many of my uncles know how to do the same thing. It stopped right there. I mean, my brothers can do a couple of things, and it's not because there wasn't anyone there who was willing to teach them to do it. And that's just in that particular area, depending on where you grew up. And you can say work smarter, not harder. Nope, because we're not building the building. So we just think because we quote unquote working smarter, or we got a little bit more money than they had, we also have more debt, and we're not sold or putting our money in the infrastructure. Any church will tell you when they undergo and they want to build a new building or a new construction project, they rely on the older members of the congregation because they are vested. Even though they can't get out there and lay the brick and do the buildings anymore, they will give their money. They will give consistently. They will pay for it. Yeah. They will pay for it. And so what we're looking at here is no matter why, we all have our reasons as to why we don't go no more. The thing is, we're not going. Many of us, the research says most of the people who are not going or doing whatever anymore as far as the church is concerned, they're just saying, you know what, they don't necessarily believe in anything in particular. Right. Like they don't. It's not like you're even going and attaching to something else. Mm-hmm. It's just
floating.
Yeah, just no. I'm fine. I'm spiritual. I just.
It's my favorite term.
This favorite term. I'm just so spiritual, and I'm not knocking anyone or anybody what they believe, but you got to stand for something, or you're gonna fall for anything. And many of us are just falling for anything. We're going to other places thinking, you had mentioned something earlier in our conversation about large African American communities going to white churches. Well, in 2018, a lot of them started leaving those churches. Now, a lot of people are still there. They started leaving those churches because when it came to situations like we see right now, when it came to matters of race and religion, your white pastor is not going to stand on the pulpit and talk about Black Lives Matter. They're not going to address the Trayvon Martins. They're not going to address the George Floyd. And they're just getting to the point now in 2020 where they're sitting down and they're willing to kind of have the conversation because it's way past due. It's past due.
Those are the most extreme cases of racism. I mean, the reality is, we could easily go back to subprime lending and how I don't know. But I mean, you go back to subprime lending and how literally people lost thousands of acres of land, thousands of houses because, the mortgages weren't structured right. They were structured to pretty much to bankrupt you, and this is like 10 years ago. This is not like 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, we were talking about redlining and how literally blacks couldn't stay in certain places because real estate brokers literally would draw a line in the sand as to where we were going to be and where they were going to sell houses. These are not opinions. These are facts. And so I guess what I've learned to do is ask the right questions. The right questions are, do you have a sense of obligation to your community? Everyone else seems to have an obligation to their community but us. It seems to be optional with us. So, for instance, if you go to any major city, you can find a Germantown, you can find a Chinatown, but you will not find an African town. What that says and what that suggests is that we don't have an economic floor to really, really attach ourselves to do anything with. And so that really comes from us just being a divided people. And so we've got to get to the point where we figure out how we unify. And I can really say that, I'm not opposed to marching. It's, that gets attention. But the reality is, it is our economic and our political power that will change situations.
It is. And I want to speak to, I agree with you, and we got to get to some of these comments. Y'all keep them coming. We about to read all of these because they're good. But, and I know this may not be a lot of people, but I can think of just quite a few pastors who are also in the role of politics. If we look at just a couple of weeks ago, here in Columbia, like Pastor Chris Johnson, I think, of Brooklyn Northeast, there was a praise and prayer in the park, where he was calling on people to come out, pastors, to come out and to pray, not just pray, but pray and protest. When you look at our church, you look at the AME church and all of the celebration and things that are taking place as far as Juneteenth, this whole week, just a week full of activities. Right. And like you said, a march, but there's a march with a call. Like they put on the table, this is what we want to see. This is what we talked about in the strategy meeting. This is what we want. So it's not just marching. If you look at in Columbia, I think you have like Ivory Thigpen, who's a pastor and also a politician. We think about Floyd Flake, one of the prominent pastors in the AME church, senior now. He did so much early on. Right. Now he's in his latter days. But there are even Stephen Green. There are people who are pastors who are politically astute and in the know, and who are also trying to get the word out in their congregations. When you look at the things that we are able to do, Pastor Folston, who's on here, like a mission that he has said over and over with his congregation is to build business owners, to have people in the congregation to become business owners. We don't teach Bible study, but teach financial literacy courses, and have seen people get out of debt, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars out of debt, because we're not just talking about the profits in the Bible, but we're talking about how to make a profit, and we're not trying to take from anyone. We're trying to help people. So I don't want to, we can't throw everybody out, because the pastors are doing a great work. There are so many that are doing a great work.
Absolutely.
But as a whole, we're kind of missing the boat. As a whole, we're missing the boat. So, somebody says churches helped out in the neighborhood, like they did more in their neighborhood. And I can definitely see that was something. And we're very missional and very mission driven and intentional about. I remember when we first got our church, it was like, okay, this is our zip code. We can say we want to take the whole zip code, but our church sits in the largest zip code in the state, 29203. So we were like, okay, we can start with our street.
Yeah, we start with
like, what if you just start with the street where you are, or the street that's closest to you, in terms of trying to make a difference? We can't do that because it's too many people cry politics and we don't want to mix church and state. I get it, but I don't get it. I think we are, in the community, but we have to have more of a presence. Taylor said, I read in an article a while back, and it shed some light on the fact that people were leaving Christianity for cultural Christianity. People are finding ways to connect with, what did she say? The churchiness.
Without the churchiness.
Without the
churchiness of church.
People are finding ways to connect without the churchiness of church.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I need. Go ahead.
No, but I understand exactly what she said. So, like, for instance, in our community, if certain things didn't take place in church, we say we ain't had church, right? If there wasn't the shout, if there wasn't the worship, as we've cultured it to be, we equate what we do in the four walls as us having church.
I know. If
and
you don't, go ahead. I can't even go.
Right. So it's kind of like if you ain't got a hoop and 3 points.
I was trying not to say that.
I ain't got no problem with it. If you ain't got an organ, a hoop, and 3 points, and somebody squalling in the back, you didn't have church.
Yeah.
And the reality is, people still have to live those other 6 days a week. And people are tired of the antics and the games, because the reality is it looks like, the people who we're supposed to be ministering to are actually prospering.
Right.
And
I think Latrell, let's mention something similar to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those situations where if we are the body of Christ, if we're supposed to be ruling and reigning with him, that's now.
Right.
Not,
in the sweet by and by.
In the sweet by and by.
Not in the sweet by and by.
And so it's one of those things, people who've been to church and done church a certain way for so long, we've almost used church as medicine. Church has almost been like a drug in some cases. You get your high, you'll be back next week, same bad time, same bad channel.
But we reduced God to a high. Like you reduce God. It's like can I say crackhead? It's like you come in on Sunday and you reduce God to that. Like, let me get my fix.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we reduce God to. Like, I'm just going to come in here, I'm going to get my fix, and then I'm right back out the door to do whatever it is I want to do. So, it's not, I think holding leaders and holding people accountable is part of our responsibility.
Right.
As a Christian. Justice put something out there about, it's time for us to be the church. And something, we got to stop going to church and just be the church.
Yeah, he's right.
And then he didn't say that. Well, that's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater also.
What do you mean?
You can't, how can we do both? You can't throw one out. And I think that's what's happening. So many people in the name of saying, well, let me just go and be whatever, be the church. I'm equating this to like being spiritual.
So you're saying it shouldn't be either or, it's just both.
Both. Don't abandon the building. Don't abandon what our ancestors built in the name of the church because you're frustrated because modern day leadership is not doing what they're supposed to do.
Right.
That's just like saying, well, I'm not going to the polls and vote because these politicians are not doing whatever. Right. If we got a responsibility at the polls, I'm saying we have a responsibility in the church. Yeah. Like you are responsible. If you don't pay your money, that pastor won't get paid. If you don't do this thing, nothing will happen. But what we say is they're not doing whatever, so I'm going to leave. And that's my thing. Well, I'm not even frustrated about it because I was ready to go too. I'm telling you, I was ready to go. But we got to do something.
Yeah, and the thing is, at the end of the day, when it comes down to, our obligation to our community, we have to start there. You know what I mean? We don't have the luxury of divorcing ourselves from our community and the things that build our community.
I hear you.
Because if we get to the point where we've gotten to the point where we're doing that, the reality is it doesn't. Think about it this way: if you divorce yourself and all your several hundred friends divorce themselves from our community, what happens to your children? They won't have a sense of who they are at all. Somebody else will have to tell them who they are. And that's the issue right now. Right now, many of us have no clue as to, what it takes, what it took to get here. And just think of it this way. It was the Voting Act's right was in the 60s, right?
I'm with you.
Really, we've been free about 52 years.
It hasn't been a long time.
Okay.
Yeah, I get.
If you know somebody that's 52 and up, they remember when they weren't free. They remember when they had, bathrooms that they couldn't go in, lunch counters that they couldn't sit at, couldn't vote. Now, at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, these people, in order to get these Voters' Rights Act and all this kind of stuff done, they had to meet somewhere. Wasn't on the internet. They had to physically meet somewhere and hash it out.
They did.
And right now, our community doesn't have a place where we meet and hash it out.
Right. Right.
1955.
Right.
Thank you, Miss
65.
Dr. Hinton.
65.
But that's where we are. And it's unfortunate, but unfortunately in our neighborhoods, we still think that
Montez said it wasn't a Zoom. They couldn't.
There wasn't a Zoom.
They couldn't hash it out over Zoom.
Some people in our community still think that water is much wetter on the other side. In other words, we don't really believe that we have the goods. And if you look at history, anything that was done, whether it was the arts, whether it was the sciences, we led that stuff. We led those charges, and we're still leading these charges. We might not get credit for it, but we're still leading these charges. And so, we have to make sure that we don't abandon our institutions, which include church, schools. We don't
have banks.
That's oh God.
But okay, we don't have banks. Okay.
So, but and I'm gonna say this, and I will not say anything else about schools. But this is the thing. When it comes down to even our HBCUs, think of our HBCUs almost function like our churches, in that we've had a mass exodus from our HBCUs. We don't think that they're good enough. We don't send our children there. And I mean, and everybody has the right to send your kids where you want to send them. It's your money, or it's your student loan.
Right.
Because we talked about that a few weeks ago. But this is the thing. For the amount of debt that you take on, you have to ask the question, was it worth it? And then the things that you learn at a HBCU, that sense of pride, that sense of culture, you will not get it at a majority school because they don't have your interests at heart, and they don't have to, and we just have to, I just want us to think about what it is we're saying when we say, I can't go to that school because it's not good enough, or I can't go to that church because it's not good enough. What does that really say about us? We have to honestly take an assessment. And I mean, the reality is we can always come up with more problems, what we're not doing, what we hadn't done. But the reality is, are you a part of the problem?
Get out of my head, because that's where I was going. Like, we really have to get to solutions. Mm-hmm. Like, are we a part of the problem? And so this is my thing. If the church, and I'm just going to say the black church, if the black church is no longer relevant, how do we, there's 40-something, whatever, however many of us on this live or that's watching in these different places, how do we become a part,
This boy says state never hit me back.
How do we become a part of the solution and not just rehash the problems? How do we become, because for me, like, okay, I'm going to go here. I'm just going to take it into people's house. Okay, if you and I have a problem, Marcus and Sharindra, and we in this house together, and we have a huge problem, and we can't figure it out. I don't feel you doing what you're supposed to be doing, and you don't feel I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And if I just decide I'm going to leave, because trust me, if any leaving ever happens in this whole thing, I'm leaving. There's 3 boys. I'm leaving. So if I decide that I'm going to leave, how is that solving the problem?
I have a button over here, y'all.
You better stop. Don't you press no button.
I'm just saying.
But leaving doesn't solve the problem. Mm-hmm. You leaving me because we just can't figure it out doesn't solve the problem. So how do we get to the root cause and try to figure it out? I mean, shy of like something crazy happening. How do we get to that? Montez says this, and I do believe it. He said that there are churches, those churches who aren't relevant right now, who weren't relevant before, and people weren't holding them accountable. They're just doing whatever. He said that they will most likely die after this pandemic. They will die. Y'all may not believe this because I see some of you who are on here, but I actually had a conversation, and she's usually on. I don't see her on. But I had a conversation with someone, and I found out that there are pastors. I didn't believe this, but there are people out there who have done nothing since the middle of March. Nothing. Now I can't get all into. I don't know. I assume they haven't done anything, so they don't get paid. You don't work, don't eat. Cottrell said something about that earlier about something about full time pastors or people who are pastoring and they're just what are they doing all this time? But there's a pastor. There are several pastors. They've not had Bible study. They've not had church online. They've not had a conference call. They've not called their people. They've not done anything since March. But you got a building. You got people who call you pastor. Not two people. Like you got people who call you pastor and you've done nothing. I sat with that thing like I could not believe that that's the case. I can't believe that is happening. Taylor says the test will be when the doors open back up. Who will walk through those doors?
You're right.
The bigger, that is true, Taylor. But also, when the doors open, will those people who didn't have an online platform before, but now have some attention and people are following them on the outline platform, will they abandon the online church once they go back into the building? Because everybody's not going back in the building. Will they abandon that?
I don't know.
Will they abandon?
It's gonna be interesting. We're gonna need to make these comments bigger.
Oh, you can't see.
You just can't have business owners without education. Stop encouraging our kids to make it by rapping in athletics. Encourage business, but educate on business ownership and etiquette. You're right.
Right, that part. Yeah, that part. Because we do. There's this big thing now that people, and many of you've seen it on social media. I feel like we're jumping because you went to HBCU, but where people went to the schools, where people were saying, sports is really where it hurts. And so what if some of these athletes, as opposed to going to the D1 schools, what if they went to the HBCU? But we're not on to talk about schools and HBCUs.
You see how this is censorship, y'all.
Marcus started that.
This is censorship. But
Hamilton brought up a great point that a lot of the HBCUs were started by preachers and leaders in the church. So they do go hand in hand. All right, I'm going to give y'all that. They do go hand in hand, our HBCUs and our churches. Many of them are closely affiliated, but they both are dying. So, like, what do we do right now?
Yeah.
What do we do?
Well, they're dying because we don't support them.
I got that.
That's it. I mean, it's like that. I wish it was more than that.
And a lot of other people that say, but we're not relevant. Like, so should I continue to trust you and you? I mean, support you, and I don't feel that you're relative.
So it's kind of like
relevant.
It's kind of like okay. Would you rather not have one?
This is why we never
so
part of the solution.
Right. So it's kind of like you got to be a part of the solution, because if you take a HBCU out of the picture, then it's a situation where you have no other alternatives. And again, we are having to go to someone else to not only be fed, but to be educated, to be protected. If you get sick, you got to go to somebody else's hospital. You got to go to somebody else's bank. Nobody sees a problem with this. This when you start talking about independence, and I think I talked about it a little bit last week, when Moses led the children of Israel out of Egypt, they were emancipated. Pharaoh let them go, and they were emancipated, but they weren't free. Their mindset was not freedom. Matter of fact, when they got across the Red Sea, what ended up happening is they started complaining, and they started telling Moses how great it was in Egypt. How we got educated better in Egypt. We got this in Egypt. We got that in Egypt. And the reality is that's how some of us are as well. Until you really free yourself in your mind, you will not have freedom. You will not have freedom. You will always look to somebody else to support you.
True. And I gotta come back up. I gotta get what Hamilton said, but then I gotta go all the way back up. Hamilton says it's bigger than support. It's a competition issue now. Kids have options and think they can create the same experience at a predominantly white institution, and it's the same with the church, right? Because as more and more are going to predominantly white institutions, we do have more and more African Americans who are going to predominantly white churches until they get there, and now they're in the midst of riots and all this other stuff that's going on, and they realize that their pastor is not going to address again what I said, what's going on in the street.
Right.
And it's parents. It's not knocking any parents in any school. I went to both. I went to Clark Atlanta and I went to USC to get my master's. And people do have the option to go wherever it is that they want to go, on whatever experience they feel like they're giving their children by sending them there. But I believe as a whole, we have a responsibility to support. Now, when we're doing that, when we're providing that support, we want to make sure that our schools and our churches are being fiscally responsible and doing the things they want to do. But we're so quick to point out when they're not, when across all sectors there's corruption, across all industries. There are people who are not doing what they're supposed to do, but we'll be quick to say, oh no, I'm done with them. I went to that school and they did this and they did that, and so it's over. And we're so quick to put our own down. Like now, if we're in this whole season of buying black, and the restaurant doesn't get your order right, or this, we're so quick to throw our own under the bus. And that's not, talk to the manager, like let them know, tell them this was a problem, see what they can do to fix it. But a lot of what we see now, and Justice said this earlier in a comment, well, he didn't say it like this, but I'm paraphrasing what I heard someone say. Jesus wouldn't recognize the worship services that we're in right now. Like if Jesus came in our buildings or in our homes, wherever it was, you're right, Justice, Jesus would not recognize what we're doing right now. But we can be in there, call on his name. Actually, some people don't even call on his name. Just go like it's yours. And Jesus wouldn't recognize it. And we come in and we have the same routine, or we do the same thing. It's the same format. I don't care if you Methodist, Baptist, Pentecostal, non-denominational, Church of God in Christ, whatever. You have a format. And we come in and we stick to that formula, and probably less than 10% of our time do we spend talking about our community, talking about outreach, putting money in outreach. We don't put money. We're saying we're putting money in ministry, but we don't put money in mission. Right. When mission is the ministry, that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, the money goes in the buildings.
Right, the money goes into the buildings, and not to the people, not to the community.
Yeah,
that's not what we're doing.
And so we have to have more and more people to support these large facilities, that are half full. When you think about even like where we are with this whole COVID thing, you have churches that were large, that were half full, but before the COVID thing hit, but we wouldn't combine those churches.
I don't know.
It becomes a situation where if we really did this thing the Bible way, if you would, it would be a lot of people who would be unemployed, quite frankly, because there would be a lot of churches that would have to mesh, which means somebody wouldn't be senior pastor. Some musicians would be sat down. It just becomes, if we wanted to be really fiscally responsible, really only 25 to 30% of money coming in should go to buildings. But we both know it's a lot more than that. So when you start talking about outreach, there is no money for outreach if you've already been overfinanced in a building.
And Hamilton was talking about that when y'all were on that whole conversation about prime lending and subprime and all of that. And I think he mentioned that the church, we're really big on leasing space that's costing us a lot of money. What he said, churches leasing out prime property for $1 a year for 100 years. Oh, leasing out prime property. Okay, it was a little different from what you were saying, but something has to be done. We can't move ahead, and we have to move from this with the church and our institutions. Well, I'm not giving them the money because I don't know what they did with the money, or they misused the money. And this goes back to me, and I'm done. 9:45, you take it. We just have to hold people accountable. Again, I cannot just walk away. I have to do something to hold people accountable. So sometimes I feel in holding people accountable, what some of us decide to do, what some people decide to do, is some people do run for office. That's kind of like their way of saying, hey, this is something that needs to be done, and we need our voice. There's a group of people over here who wants their voice to be heard, and so I'm going to come out, and I'm going to make sure. that the voices of these people are heard,
That's right.
because you do have people who are playing politics, and you have people who are playing preachers and who are playing church, if you will. Yes, we are the church. Like, we are the church. Stop, Montez. I'm gonna stay focused.
No,
We are.
it's
Oh, it's
Cottrell.
Cottrell this time. Sorry, but we are the church. But we have to get behind people when we know people are trying to express our interests, our best interests, and be the voice in the community that our community so desperately needs. This is when we have to stand behind those people and support them. What Cottrell talking about?
Cottrell said black churches are like liquor stores. They're on every corner. Let me tell you, and I'm gonna keep that moving because
Oh, Jesus.
it's just right. It's just the right thing to do. But look, one thing that we can, and I guess this is the point where we probably need to start moving towards solution.
Okay.
So, like, for instance, if we looked at the
y'all, let's start moving towards right. Summer, it's not you. Moving towards solution. Go ahead, Marcus.
So if we look at, and this is not Catholicism, but if we look at how the Catholic Church is set up, you know, they don't have 1,000 bishops. You know, you have, you it's one of the things, they have their own government. They have their own police. It really looks like the kingdom. You know what I mean? Versus we have to farm out everything. We have to we sub out everything because we own nothing. And so I guess in creating solutions, tangible solutions, we got to own our churches back. That's the first thing. So, and this will be a hard sell because, pride gets in the way. If we can't afford the church that we're in, sell it.
Well, somebody already told us a lot of them
Sell
will
it.
be gone. And a lot of us won't have buildings once we come back after COVID.
Well, most of our black churches weren't started in buildings anyway.
It's true.
So it's one of those things, if you look at, again, and a part of this is we don't know our history. A part of this has to do with the fact that we really don't understand why some of our churches were formed in the first place. So it's kind of like if you don't know why you were started, you won't know why you need to stay. You know what I mean? So it's, for instance, if you take the AME Church, the AME Church was started out based on the fact that our founders and other leaders were denied access to something as simple as prayer. Okay. And so it was a political thing. Okay. So for anybody in this Reformation to say that politics doesn't matter, you don't know your history. Okay. When it comes down to the schools, the HBCUs, most of them were started out of churches. And so if you look at most of the private institutions, they're backed by a church denomination. So, for instance, and they needed to be because we wouldn't have got educated otherwise. There would be no doctors. Most people don't realize most HBCUs either had a med school or a law school. Now, they lost them over time for a variety of reasons. But you have to think, we didn't just start becoming lawyers in the 80s. Where did Thurgood Marshall get his degree from? What, Howard? I'm just saying. So we have to understand all of the people that got these freedoms for us. Dr. Martin Luther King, these people, they went to HBCUs because they had to. They didn't have an option. And the reality is we have to look at it for what it is. I don't know. It's a bunch of
y'all. Thank you
for the engagement.
Yeah, y'all are faster than we can even keep up. So I appreciate it. I do appreciate it. Summer brought up a good point. You asking people in church, or you ask people who can't even manage their own money.
Yeah.
Who not good stewards of their own money, and they are sometimes the one who end up counting the money in the church. They're the ones who are on the finance team.
That's a scary thought.
Those types of things, making sound. How are you going to make sound financial decisions for the church? But it gets back to how we end up in our churches and in our positions. We get to this whole family church mentality, and you don't do what I want you to do, then fine, we'll just split. As if, again, splitting is just another form of leaving. That's like me just saying bye, I'm gone. That's not the solution. That's not the solution to
Yeah.
the problem. But we see it all the time. Institutional budgets and all those things that are put in place. Yeah, we do, Marcus. We have to know our history. But we got to get to these solutions. Like, what is it that we're going to do? And I do not want to sound cliche and just say, okay, we got to go to the polls and vote. Because it's like, what does that have to do with church? But what you just said is church and politics, they do go hand in hand. Whether you want to admit it or not, they go hand in hand. And if you don't believe me, or Christianity and politics,
Oh, yeah.
and Catholicism. I mean, private and Catholicism, they
Religion.
just go right hand in hand. And I had to pull out my church history book from
Lord.
from seminary. Yeah,
She has the big books tonight.
no, because really, whether it's this book or whether it's the Bible, when you start talking about the early church and Reformation and all those kind of things, and you get into Martin Luther and Constantine and all these are the founding church fathers. All this stuff went back to politics. All this stuff went back to a form of government.
Wesley, all
And
of it.
people didn't want to adhere to a particular form of government. They wanted to be able to worship the way they wanted to be able to worship.
Mm-hmm.
And the government said, this is what you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so they decided to do all these things. I mean, Wesley and them boys left and decided to come to the United States. I'm just saying. I'm not trying to be a seminarian, but I'm just saying. You cannot say that politics is not a part of this. It is a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
Who was Pontius Pilate? Come on. Answer the question. Type a comment. I mean, who I'm saying.
Our salvation is based on a political decision.
Who was he?
Yeah.
And so I can't get with this. And we got to stop thinking, I mean, even when it comes to our church, yes, there are politics there. If the person who's been counting the money and dealing with the money all the time at church is not the best person to deal with it, vote him out. It shouldn't be a dictatorship.
No matter how big the family is.
It shouldn't be a dictatorship.
Yeah. Wesley and them boys.
And they can't go start something on their own. When they go try to do it, you don't go with them.
Yeah.
Hamilton says pastors have to recognize their power in communities and have relationships with decision makers. Yes, Hamilton, that's why I have a relationship with you. Exactly. I'm just playing. Our families go way back before any of this, so this is sheer coincidence. But you are exactly right. This is what we have to do. Someone brought up earlier, like what does a pastor do? I mean, I can tell you there's so much that you can do in a 40-hour work week as a pastor that doesn't even have anything to do with Sunday. But you're right, as the pastor, you should be at the community meetings, you know, zooming in on the city council or the county council meeting. You should know what's going on the state level. You should be connected with the NAACP or whatever other organizations that are out there. You have to be in touch with all of those things. You need to know the bankers and the movers and the shakers and all these people. You have to be engaged. Pastors are not just sitting around reading the Bible all day, every day, and calling the people on the sick and shut-in list. That is not what we are doing. This is why we have missionaries and evangelists and other people who are helping us do the work. The pastor isn't the only one who has to make the hospital visits, but the pastor has to be engaged in what the other things that are going on in the community as well, which is why I will be marching.
I'm going to let you march on.
I mean, I've marched before. I mean, we've done these things before we became pastors, but you have to be engaged. You have to be engaged. You can't just sit and talk about this stuff, but you have to know the reason. You have to know the outcome. You're not doing anything just to be doing it. There has to be a clear purpose at the end of the day that you know you're going to be a part of trying to bring about change. And systemic change is difficult.
And it's not overnight.
It's not overnight.
It's not overnight. And the other thing is, you know, when it comes down to really moving any cause, it's really about the laity. You know, the reality is your pastor, they're in a leadership position because they're going to represent the church. But the reality is that laity, that group of people who serve that church and serve that community, those are the people who really will make the difference. You know, generally, old school would be like the laity would bring the agenda to the pastor and say, look, we have these set of problems in the community. This is what we need to solve. And then the pastor would pull the people together, lead the charge, and, you know, gather the resources. And so it's one of those things. I think the Saints have become lazy over time, because we really, even in the pews, really still believe that pastor's gonna give you every little thing.
But we like the pews
You
now
know,
because they have cushion on them.
yeah. I mean,
The other pews didn't.
yeah, and but I mean, like I said, it's one of the things. Church, school, all of that stuff goes hand in hand. It's funny because I see my mom on here. If I'm not mistaken, she was in the first graduating class, integration class at Clemson. And Clemson has some stuff going on with their head coach, and some of his comments. If you don't know what those are, go back to my Facebook and look yesterday what I post. But anyway, it's one of those situations when you have a coach that's making $9.5 million a year, and the only thing on his agenda, on his mind, is football matters, and he wears jerseys like that to remind us. It's a slap in the face to our community. And I asked a simple question. These kids are not in school now. If you have your school misrepresenting you, not having your best interests at heart, why do you continue to send your children there? It's just a question. It's not a judgment call. It's just a question. Some might say, well, you have more opportunity. Well, let's just go to the statistics. Most people who graduate from college don't work in their field, so the opportunity is limited. I'm just saying. So,
and I like what Justice and Hamilton are saying some of the same thing, and Adrian is saying the same thing. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, they're saying the same thing, and actually, Mom just said the same thing. Everybody has to come together to do their part. Yeah, unlike you, Justice. You have to be able, the torch has to be passed at some point. But you know what? I realize sometimes people aren't willing to pass the torch. And so, yep, it's okay to just go ahead and just right. Gently, just get it. Just take it. Just get it. Do what you have to do. But we have to stay the course. Like, we can't just say, I'm going to go and get it. I'm gonna go and grab me a torch and just leave and forget about the church. And I think that's what's happening. Hamilton, I'm with you as far as your leadership and what you've been called to do. And you don't have to always get into this thing about how you got to wait your turn. You got to wait your turn. Like, your turn is now. Every great change that we've seen that's come about, it was because young people were leading that charge. A lot of you who are on this live, you were taking the bull by the horn, so to speak, and you were going out there and you were forging ahead to do what needed to be done in the name of Jesus, in the name of justice, in the name of righteousness. You were doing those things. Adrian mentioned we all play a part. And let me tell you, when Jesus gave us this commission, this command that he wanted us to do, it wasn't just for pastors. And I think that's where we've missed it. But he says, I have given all of you, basically, the authority. I've given you the authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go ye out and make disciples. That's not just a charge to me because I have a license in the frame and says I can preach. You're charged with making disciples. You're charged with making disciples and going out and baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. We know it. Matthew 28-20. We know it. This is what we're all called to do. And in 2020, going out making disciples may mean we're out in the streets together. It may mean we're doing evangelists on social media together, doing this type of thing. And it may mean we're in a building together, strategizing and meeting. But however we're called to make the disciples, we have to do the work. The time is not now to abandon the church. The time is not now to abandon politics and everything that's going on. The time is right now. The time is now to stand up and to do what's right. It's always the right time to do what's right. And what's right is us supporting our churches, us supporting our HBCUs, us taking our rightful place in society, supporting our businesses, and supporting our community.
Hamilton says the church is the only place where wait your turn is enforced without consequence. And unfortunately, I see it in politics too, I'm gonna say this though, there was a time where people got their self-esteem and self-worth from church. I mean, and that's not the case anymore. And I'm not saying that was necessarily a good thing. I'm just saying that's just what it was. So, you had those men in the church, if the church was, it might have been small, but it was at least going to look good. You wouldn't see chip and paint. You wouldn't see, bathrooms not working, just general maintenance type stuff because they had so much pride in what they had because they probably built it.
They built it, like Montez said.
Yeah. Now, granted, you know, when we look at what they built, they didn't have building codes and a whole lot of other stuff going on then either. But, it's just one of those situations, the pride level that we had at one point and the whole how sacred we made church is fleeting. So something that's simple, we think about something as simple as communion. The church I came out of, they would actually dim the lights. They would really, they had the white gloves. It was a moment. Yeah, and so it's just like now it's kind of like that's just not the case. Kind of anything goes, and we don't have to be responsible for what we were handed. So like every generation is handed something. Our grandparents handed us a church situation. Was it perfect? No, but it's what we got. And we're going to have to, in turn, hand something to our kids. Will it be perfect? No, but that's what they're going to have. If we actually give up the thing that we've had for generations, where does that leave us? What's Hamilton saying?
We are out of time. He said everybody has made great comments. Thank you, Faye. These are great comments. But we are out of time. And I want to leave it with something that Adrian said. Actually, like, we have time now to be activists. Because so many people are still sheltering in place. But what happens when you have to go back to the job and go back and do all these other things that you used to do? Will we still have the time to be activists? I pray that we will.
Wait your turn. Wait your turn in church. You got it, Pastor. Oh Lord.
Okay, he can't read it. Pastor Paul said we close out with that. Much. He said, sadly, many people are not meaningful to the secular world, so the church has converted to influence and positions, titles. Yep. Yeah, in the church, true. That's what we have because we can't get them anywhere else. You can't do anything else. Okay. All right, y'all. Our time is up. This has been so fruitful, but we have to keep working. Do the word, Marcus. Close us out.
Well, this is the thing. This is the start of this conversation because ultimately we're going to talk about all of our institutions. We started with church, and this is probably not over, but you have church, you have school, you have hospitals, and you have banking. Those are our 4 pillars of the community. And so we've got to talk about those things because right now, if you talk to anybody over 60, they'll probably say that one of the worst things that could have happened to our community is integration. What we wanted was rights, but we got integration. And when we got integration, we got diluted. So, in 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we actually owned our institutions. Now the bank does. So those are conversations that we'll be having in the next several weeks. But we do try to respect your time. It's been a long day. It's been a good day. And we certainly appreciate the engagement that you all have. And we look forward to you all joining us next week, 9:00 for next Faith, week? Family, and Father. What?
Father's Day?
You got something planned? I don't know.
We'll let you know. Thank you so much for joining us. I guess it's your day if you want to be on for another episode of Faith, Family, and Finance. Y'all have a good night.
Thank y'all. Take care.
Thank you.